Good evening. The Ranter is back to go into yet another rambling diatribe of the news of the day. And we are now past the Democratic National Convention, and we are done with the 4 days of everyone's happy, joyness. It was a good convention for as much as I saw, because I was also working most of the time, so I was only catching bits here and there of various speeches, but the environment looked upbeat. Everyone seemed to be happy, dancing around, singing joyfully. When the mood struck them, they're all chanting away. They're following the cues of the speakers, and all in all, it was a pretty positive, upbeat thing for the party that only a few short weeks before felt like we were pretty much swirling the bowl, as in terms of Biden and his obvious decline that we saw at the presidential debate with Trump. Now, we're feeling much better of ourselves now that we have Kamala Harris, that had taken the baton from Biden and is continuing the relay race against Trump. We already discussed how Trump seems to be handling it, now dealing with Kamala as opposed to dealing with Joe Biden. And that pretty much means he's not doing that well at all about it. It is a remarkable thing that, despite the fact that you could seriously, logically say that just because Kamala Harris has taken the place of Joe Biden, you could not actually run with the policy arguments that you would have against Joe Biden on Kamala Harris, since Kamala Harris was part of that administration. So any of the critiques that you could have had policy-wise against Joe Biden, you can absolutely put it against Kamala Harris. And yet, that's not happening. That's not happening. It's not happening with Trump, and it's not happening with the right-wing media, which is following Trump's cues, or any of his surrogates that are following Trump's cues. They'd rather go into the identity politics, which is actually pretty interesting, because isn't that what people claim Democrats do? Too busy with the identity politics. They were just worried about race and social justice and sexual orientation, this and that and this and that. And this is all we're hearing about as any criticism against Kamala Harris when it comes to Trump is identity politics. But convention, as now, came and went. We're all feeling good. For those who are supportive of Kamala Harris, who are, or at the very least, someone opposing to Donald Trump, and we don't care who it is that's on the top of the tippet, they will just be going for that. Here's the thing. Now it's time to go to work. You cannot rest on the complacency. You are feeling the sugar high, which you are deserving to feel. I want you to feel that. I want you to feel that thrill of hope, the audacity of hope, as it were, coin the Obama-era phrase, to lift you up, motivate you, engage you into this process. But don't rest on the laurels. Don't rest on the complacency. Yeah, sure, if the election was held now, it would seem like, from our point of view, from what we've seen of the crowds, of the energy, the enthusiasm, the positivity going into Kamala Harris, that if we had the election right now, Kamala Harris would win. But it's not now. It's November 5th. And we have to take stock in that. We have to understand that we have just thrown the gauntlet down. We have put the cards on the table. Now it's time to really push it. Do not think that Donald Trump, even in his rapidly deteriorating decline in of himself, that he is a dead duck, that this is now a walk in the park. It is certainly not a walk in the park. Donald Trump in even if he is imploding, even if he is deteriorating before your eyes, that his verbal articulation is also suffering. His adherence to any form of policy is nearly non-existent, ignoring his own people, smart people, who are trying to tell him to hit her on the policy, and he's not, or at the very least, his form of hitting her on policy is making up a bunch of stuff and then having to kind of adhere it to whatever policy he's trying to throw at. But just because all that's happening does not mean that, we can rest. It's in the bag. We don't have to do anything. No. No. If you want to defeat Donald Trump, you have to vote. You have to be active. You have to have the vigilance. You have to have the energy. And to get people around you to vote positively if they are on the line of voting for Kamala Harris. Don't try to convince people. If you're somebody who is an ardent Trump supporter, don't try to convince them not to vote for Trump. If they want to vote for Trump, they vote for Trump. That's the American way here. Everyone has a one vote. Everyone has their own opinion. Everyone has their own point of view. And just because we disagree with that point of view does not necessarily mean that we should be telling them not to vote the way they do. In kind of an analogy of that, on my the social media group that I admin on Middle America, someone put up this graph of how things were 4 years ago and how things now, and he's trying to convince people. If one of the question is, how are you better off 4 years ago? And someone happens to say yes you are, and he's trying to convince them with charts and graphs of how no you're not. Dude, that's a feeling. How do you feel like you were better off than you were 4 years ago? You're not going to convince someone that they're wrong on a feeling. And 4 years ago, at this point, we were ravaged by COVID. How many scores of dead per day were happening under COVID? How the economy crashed under COVID. You want to try to blame democratic communities for lockdowns? Fine. But people were dying. And we were not necessarily knowing what was going on with COVID. I love the hindsight 2020 folk that this is now claiming that COVID is no big deal. I mean, right now, in personal time here, there's a COVID scare in my own house at the moment. Whether COVID is going to be evident in a test or not, don't know yet. But that doesn't mean that this is not a scary thing, especially if you are vaccinated or you have boosters. That doesn't mean that you're going to be immune to it. I got COVID after my vaccine, and I understood before then, that vaccinations is not immunity. And I'm grateful and thankful that I was vaccinated, because at the time I was 44 or 45. I am heavy set. I am near diabetic. So if I did not have the vaccine, I would be having a semi-romantic relationship with a ventilator, because that would be how I would be breathing. So I do kind of take the flippant attitude when people have towards the vaccine, a little bit edgy. In any event, 4 years ago, we did not know as much as we knew now about COVID. We did not have a vaccine then. If someone got COVID, they did a battery of tests, they did a battery of medications to try to eliminate the symptoms and finally cure it. I mean, the Cadillac, of the symptoms of it, right? The same as the smorgasbord of chemicals that they gave Trump when he had COVID. So, no, we were not better off than we were we are better off now than we are 4 years ago. We weren't better off back then. It is weird how people want to use that phrase. It's just this empty slogan of this without even thinking about the words they are saying and the ramifications of what you're trying to say here. And the fight, again, goes back to the fight versus reality and the perception of reality. And the perception of reality that they want to push is this belief that we are in an economic wasteland, that inflation is so high and joblessness is so high, and the economy is just tanking, it's a disaster, the country is destroyed. You know, there's many melodramatic adjectives that we can throw into this post-apocalyptic Mad Max Fury World wasteland that we are now in because of Biden and Harris. But now, since Harris is now the presidential candidate, this is all Harris now. This is all Harris. It was Biden, but now it's just all Harris. Harris did all this. That is the perception they are pushing. And the only people that are buying it, or appearing to buy it, are the Trump supporters who are in the room, who are laughing and chanting and nodding their heads because they're being entertained. It's funny to say such silly things because it's entertaining when the dancing bear is doing that. Is it reality? No, it's not reality. At the end of Trump's term in office, due to COVID and his mismanagement of COVID, 3 million jobs were lost. As of now, the Biden-Harris administration plus 16 million jobs gained. Inflation is so high. Inflation's so high. We're keep talking about it. 19 points, whatever that Fox News was talking about. Inflation is down to 3 point. At the level around 2021. But again, it's reality versus perception of reality. You want there to be some modicum of a significant success here, you have to push the reality. If you hear this nonsense, challenge it. Challenge it. Say, no, that is inaccurate. And explain why it's inaccurate. Because all they want to do is do this running scree constantly so that it overwhelms the senses of people who are either listening to it voluntarily or they're compelled to listen to it for one reason or another until they start nodding their heads. It's the Trump official that was at the DNC, the ex-Trump official that was at the DNC, the press secretary, said Trump told her, if you say this over and over enough, people will start to believe it. That is a paraphrase of a Hitler quote. The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. The more you say something as thus, with earnestness, to saying that it's true, people will believe that it's true, regardless if it's true or not, so long as you keep saying it. Now, during the convention, the who's who's of Democratic names in politics, past and present, showed up for the support of Kamala Harris and the support of Joe Biden. Joe Biden came out pretty much doing his farewell speech. And I'll tell you that it was probably one of his best political speeches he's ever done, at least as I ever heard. All the energy that he had left in him on the political stage, before the political eye, he left it there. He left there strong. He left with his voice strong. He spoke a long time, and only till the very end did it seem like he was starting to muddle out the words. But he would catch himself and he would correct himself, and he went out strong. To say this about Joe Biden, I reiterate that he wasn't my first choice, second choice, third choice for the presidency in 2020. He only got my vote because I wanted Trump to lose, which majority of people, I dare say, who voted had that motivation, as opposed to being ride or die for Biden. But I'll tell you, for all his virtues and his faults, Joe Biden started his national political career as one of the youngest senators in these United States at 29. He ends his national political career as the oldest president. That says something. You know, he may not have been in the forefront of our political atmosphere in life for the past 50 plus years, but he was always there. Either he was in the forefront or he was in the periphery, he was always there. That makes him a staple, that makes him a household name, and now he's no longer there. That is one of the old guard. Thinking about that, somebody who's been in the national political life since the 70s. Think of all his contemporaries who are no longer with us, or either retired or dead. The Teddy Kennedys, and so forth. You think of various names on both sides of the aisle who you may have heard have been active in the 70s or the 80s or even the 90s, that are no longer active in one form or fashion. But Joe Biden was there. Joe Biden's been there. I would say that his physical, mental viability, max age limit, or latest time would probably be if he ran for president in 2016. That was probably the last chance. But he did run. He did run in 2020. He did win. We had questions of his decline then. Surprised people are like pretending that we did not have these conversations then. But he went out strong. You got to give it to him. Good or bad, here and gone, like him, hate him, respect the moment for him. But alongside Biden, his wife speaking, his daughter speaking, and then all the others. Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Bernie Sanders, Hakeem Jeffries, a who's who. But at the end, Kamala Harris herself stepped up to do her acceptance speech of the nomination. That was probably also one of the better speeches that she has done, showing that she is ready. She's ready to do the step up to become president. Now, there are two particular topics, two particular policies that she's admittedly weak on, as Biden was admittedly weak on: the border and the Israeli-Gaza conflict. She tried tackling both. Plus or minus, good or bad, whatever it was, at least she was brave enough to do it. And, to make the emphatic claim, which is the running line for both parties, that, we must defend Israel, we must support Israel, we must make sure that we provide for Israel in their defense. However, we must push for a ceasefire. And she did say that the Palestinian people should have the dignity, the respect, and the self-determination. You might call it code, you might call it a dog whistle. But she is laying out in no uncertain terms that the Palestinians in Gaza should be considered their own people in their own land, in their own state. Without saying a two-party, two-state system, two-state solution, she said it. Without saying it. Obviously, doesn't go far enough, and it doesn't wash away our responsibility in making sure that our money and our munitions are put in the hands of people who decided to cross that border into Gaza and decided that the ratio of how many Palestinians need to be killed, tortured, tormented, raped to get at the lesser amount of numbers in Hamas fighters. See, there's always going to be the problem with that. Which is why there were pro-Palestinian, not Hamas, but pro-Palestinian protesters that was trying to disrupt things, which they didn't get close to disrupting. They tried, they didn't. And then the other part, of course, is the border. Now again, perceptional reality versus reality. As long as you keep saying that it's an open border, people are just flooding in. People are flooding in and they're flooding in drugs as well. And you run into, you mention the accounts of people who have been hurt by an illegal immigrant or killed by an illegal immigrant or raped by an illegal immigrant as your gotchas, as your shock value here. While the reality is that all those events, all those incidents that should never have happened, obviously, clearly, first of all, the account of those are minuscule in the numbers as opposed to the dramatic, oversized, domestic amounts of homegrown Americans who commit crime, who commit murders, who commit rapes, and are influenced and motivated by drug use or drug pushing or drug business in and of itself. Homegrown. As far as it seems, as we're concerned in terms of Democrat versus Republican here, it seems that the only crime Republicans are really concerned about is crimes done by illegal immigrants, and somehow magically homegrown Americans, we're not worrying about those crimes. Except for in Chicago, because we always have to point to Chicago. But ignore all the other places where crime has gone down. Even in Chicago. We just like talking about Chicago because, again, perceptional reality. If we keep talking about it over and over again, you'll start bobbing your head because you were logically and mentally just beaten down. You went blind on paperwork with the oversaturation of the same thing hitting you over and over and again. You know what? Fuck it. Fine. Whatever. Fine. Because everyone has a human limit. So the reality, however, becomes that as much as an open border, if people claim that it is, more arrests have been made under Biden. More detentions were done under Biden. More confiscation of drugs at the border done under Biden. Oh, incidentally, in terms of between the two previous administrations, between the Biden and the Trump administrations, Trump let more people go as opposed to Biden. I don't know if that's supposed to be a good or bad thing, but that seems to be an ironic thing. Especially for someone who talks about the border so often and talks about how, now, not only they're coming in caravans, they're coming from caravans from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because they emptied the jails and they emptied the mental institutions. All the crazies are coming here. How do you know? You're now a private citizen. See, here's the interesting thing, that, obviously we have to be responsible and adult enough and not reckless enough to understand that this race is still a race. That we have to keep vigilant and we have to be clear and wide-eyed and be ready to vote when we're ready to vote. But still, a part of you has to question, why is anybody listening to Trump? Especially in the past few weeks, since Kamala has taken over the presidential race, that Trump is just gotten even more deteriorated. And the scaremongering, the fearmongering, scaremongering, this, if I don't win, it will be World War III. There'll be World War III. There'll be a Great Depression. There won't be a country there. There won't be a country. And I heard this the last few days, and this is interesting in the last few rallies that Trump has done. Let's see. Kamala Harris met with Vladimir Putin before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Really? Well, no, then it gets even better. Kamala Harris had a conversation with Hamas just before October 7th. I think if Trump could, it would talk to his religious voters and tell them, Kamala Harris took a time machine. She went back in time so that she could be there at Christ's crucifixion to nail the ingots to his feet. Kamala Harris killed the dinosaurs. She went back in time, brought down the meteorite, killed the dinosaurs. See, this is where you have legitimate, when you could possibly have legitimate issues with Kamala Harris in terms of policy, in terms of her past history, in terms of what her blip of a presidential run in 2020 was, and her debate that she tried against Tulsi Gabbard, which failed. You could have all these legit things that you could talk about her time as a DA. But no, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about the policies that she would be pushing, because they're going to be still adherent to Biden policies. So do you think is a no-brainer, though? You could talk about that about her. No. We're going to talk about how she suddenly became black. How she's a communist and a socialist. Her Jamaican father was a Marxist. You have yet to figure out what he will say about her mother. Just saying and doing what they can to scare his voters. And on the flip side of the coin, pander to them. Pander to everybody. Try to pander to women that he's going to help them with their reproductive rights. This is the guy who in 2016, and during the 2016 election, he got it into his head to say in public that the mother should be punished for doing an abortion. He had to correct himself. But that's where his thinking was at the time. But, and even though he wants to, like, publicly disavow it now, so many people in the Trump administration, in the Trump orbit, was doing Project 2025 that, of course, his fingerprints are all over that. And hell, it's only going to be enacted, even by their own words, in their own language, it will be enacted when he becomes president. So it's contingent upon them that Trump wins the White House, and it's contingent upon him that he has their support to win the White House. So therefore, they would have their wonderful executive power grab and to destroy things like the Department of Education. So again, circling back, as much as Trump seems to be deteriorating, even physically, even with his makeup, draining away from his face in Arizona, he's not gone. This is not a slam dunk. And even if you thought it was a slam dunk, don't get complacent. There's still a lot of time. This is August 25th. In a month it'll be September 25th. In another month it'll be October 25th. And then October 25th, you got 6 days to October 31st. And then from the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12 days from that would be Election Day. So 2 months plus 12 days. We are not out of any form of woods here, folks. And there is light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel is all the way out there in 2 scores plus 12 days. Do not get complacent. Do not think it's in the bag. Do not think that you don't need to do anything. You need to get out there and vote when the time comes. Have the conversations with friends and family upon what you believe. Try to inspire people through your opinion, through your experience, what you feel is right or wrong. Don't try to convince people. If you know somebody's going to be a Trump supporting, don't alienate them. Don't cause a rift between you and the other over this. Be firm in the stance that you have for your own self. If you're going to vote for Kamala Harris, give the reasons why you're going to vote for Kamala Harris, even if that reason is, I don't want to see Trump back in the White House, so she's getting my vote. Fuck you. Don't say fuck you, but fuck you. But, it's just hard to have the conversations with people where you see what Trump is like in front of people. Then you look at your friend or your family member, and they're intelligent, they're conscientious, they are compassionate, they are good people. But you can't quite square the logical circle as to why these good people would want to vote for that again. But there you go. Now, of course, the flip side of this, after the great high of the Democratic National Convention coming and going, and the momentum that Kamala Harris has, Trump is trying to get some garner of front page news as Robert Kennedy Jr. has dropped off the race and has vowed to support Donald Trump and has endorsed him, stood with him at the rally in Las Vegas. Or was it Phoenix? I don't know. Anyway. Stood with him. And obviously he picked the right candidate because RFK Jr. himself said the RNC only mentioned Biden twice, I guess in contrast to what the DNC was mentioning Trump, right? When in reality that twice was more along the lines of 400 times. So clearly he is in the right candidacy to support because he lied and he's supporting a liar. My feeling, because I've seen people try to make this out to be a big deal, how this is like turning point or whatever. And I go, really? Why? Why? I mean, up to this point, you know, Robert Kennedy Jr., when Biden was still in the race, was polling somewhere around a respectable 10 or so percent. You know, no shot in hell, but 10%, right? Once it became evident that Kamala Harris was not only now in the race, but her momentum had started building and she was gaining the crowds, that 10% of RFK Jr. went down to 4%. I do have questions about this. About why is this so significant. From what I observed of Robert Kennedy Jr., he was pulling less liberals and progressives, drawing less of them, and drawing more conservatives. I remember when Fox News was trying to tout RFK Jr. as some, Democratic alternative. That he attracts the liberals, attracts the progressives, he'll track them away from Biden. But then they realize that when they put him on interviews and they try to get him to say some triggering things, and he wouldn't do that, then they realize to their horror that the person that they're promoting, some of his stances actually attracted to conservatives that would be drawing away from Trump. So they started pulling him from interviews. The Kennedy family has pretty much disavowed him for his endorsing Trump. So I don't know how much name recognition that you're going to get out of that. There are people who, I've seen the articles of like RFK Jr. supporters and voters who, when they get the reaction as about him dropping out of the race and supporting Trump, their response is being frustrated. And I can understand that. That, it won't make sense unless RFK Jr. is given a hefty cabinet position or department around, like the Department of Health. Which I don't know if Trump would do that. Because in that context, he would put somebody there who has an independent mind, as far as people think, that would not follow lockstep in what his own opinions are, would have their own thing, have his own platform within the Trump administration. And as Cowboy Bill Watts of the Mid-South Professional Wrestling in the 80s was talking about working with Vince McMahon in the WWF, there's only one room for one Titan at Titan Towers. There's only room for one head in the Trump administration, and that would be Trump. So, RFK Jr., if he was going to be in the Trump administration in a significant position, would have to be nothing more than a glorified toady, like everyone else had to be. And I don't think his supporters would want that. And again, the RFK Jr. supporters, I get the feeling they're going to do, or some of them going to do, what some Nikki Haley supporters are doing. Is that they are supporting Harris, not Trump, even though Nikki Haley full-throatedly endorsed Trump and wanted those who name themselves Nikki Haley supporters voting for Harris or whatever, wanting them to cease and desist, and they're not going to do that. because the same adage, the same theory holds. They were supporting Nikki Haley, and the RFK Jr. Followers were supporting him because they did not want to support Trump. They wanted that alternative. They turned to an alternative. If they wanted to vote for Donald Trump, to support Donald Trump, they would have done that by now. And given few of the weirder stuff that's going on with RFK Jr., I don't know about the brainworm thing. I'm not going to throw any negative shade about that because I don't know what that is. With that dead baby cub story? What the fuck was that? Why? What? Oh, and I love it a few months ago when he was on some sort of the news show. When he was on a news show and it was kind of the reporter was doing like a gotcha question upon, oh, have you ever took a plane and took a ride on Epstein's plane? And he goes, yes. So he has no problem admitting that he was on the Lolita Express. So forgive me if I do not see how this is a turning point. In fact, if you really think about it, if he did at all drew Democratic or progressive voters away from Harris, then tactically speaking, he should have stayed in the race. He should have been that third party thorn in the foot. Now, one of the many factors that involved Hillary Clinton losing the 2016 race to Donald Trump, I believe, is because of Jill Stein in the margins. There were some states where the voting was actually pretty close between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in these flyover states that she wouldn't be bothered to actually campaign because they were not part of her stronghold. See, Russia didn't need to get involved in screwing her over. She screwed her over enough. Plus, she was hated for 30 years. But it was close. Some of these states where she could have gotten it was close between the two. Because she failed, though, because a little sliver of voters that went to Jill Stein. And Jill Stein voters were shaved off of Hillary Clinton more than they were shaved off of Donald Trump. See, that's the danger of third party, especially weak third party. I think the only really significant third party candidate that really, at least for this first run, was Ross Perot. That really took the run. He took the money on a run, or the run for the money. Either way, you might say Ralph Nader in 2000. That may be a contributing factor of how Al Gore lost to Bush. Maybe, but in this instance, if they believe that RFK Jr. was going to shave votes away from Kamala Harris, then he should have stayed in the race to do that. Now, as he's now a creature of Donald Trump, that's all moot. He's not going to get extra support now that he has RFK Jr. In his cast of characters of lemmings, in his campaign, his sycophants, another talking head. Could be wrong, but I'm just not sensing the important vibe here as others are. But be that as it may, the one things that the the Democratic National Convention did do, and did do it well, they made the definition. They made the contrast. Donald Trump on Kamala Harris has been trying to define her And he said this out front. He let the cat out of the bag. The only reason why he was doing some of these things was trying to convince people that she was a communist. Not saying that she is. Saying that I want to make you think she is. That's what I'm doing here. But the DNC, all their speakers, and Kamala Harris laid it out perfectly. Who do you have? What's the dividing line between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris grew up middle class, worked at McDonald's, worked her way through school, earned her degrees. Donald Trump, millionaire brat, wealthy from the start, had want of nothing, had need of nothing, handed everything. Kamala Harris supports the working class. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden walked the line. Joe Biden, the only president in these United States in its history that ever walked with people on strike. As did Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris supports the working man and working woman. Donald Trump represents the owners, the CEOs. Donald Trump, in his interview with Elon Musk, congratulated and praised Elon Musk for firing those on strike. Kamala Harris is a prosecutor. For good or for ill of how she did her job, we're being defined by those like Trump and on the right as being soft on crime. That, in California, if someone robs someone, if it's not over a certain amount, they don't bother to try to prosecute. And they claim that's a Kamala Harris thing. Even though on the left people say that she persecuted and tried to get somebody sent to the death penalty, try to influence that. So pick your poisons of which was right or wrong there. Usually it's something in the middle, but Donald Trump is found civilly liable for sexual assault. Donald Trump has been convicted of 34 felonies concerning hush money payments to a porn star. Hush money payments that was derived from his campaign, that was only supposed to go to campaign, instead went through a lawyer that got laundered over and then sent to Stormy Daniels. If the big fat lech himself used his own money so that he can have his jollies with his mushroom with Stormy Daniels while his actual wife just gave fucking birth to Barron, if he used his own money to pay her off, we would not have heard of any of that. But no, he illegally used his campaign money for his personal piggy bank. Pretty much is how he's been using the campaign money now as his piggy bank. Has other Republican candidates who have been going to Trump businesses and Trump resorts and Trump hotels in their own way of supporting the president, for the president to give that money. And I don't call him president. I call him President Trump. I don't care. He was president. I'll call President Clinton President Clinton. Yeah, I don't care. I'm not going to say former. He was a president. There you go. But that makes it all the better, doesn't it? Doesn't make it sound better that this President Trump is taking the money from his supporters, not even flooding into his own campaign. He's keeping it. He's keeping it for himself. He's a scam artist. He's a con artist. He's a snake oil salesman. Instead of his snake oil is Trump steaks or Trump vodka. Take a ride on Trump Airlines. Get educated at Trump University. So in that definition, it is the prosecutor versus the criminal. The prosecutor, who is working class, who supports the working class and the middle class lifestyle. The criminal, who only pals around and supports the CEOs, the owners, the businessmen, who has no qualms on abusing the working man and makes sure they don't do the right, and finds ways out of paying them if they could for their goods and services. That talks about America first, but has everything in his own gift shop, in his own Trump hotel, a Trump Tower made in China or Bangladesh. And who is wealthy, who's never known a day in the middle class. There's your definitions. It is good to feel positive and uplifted. It is good to feel the momentum, to feel the rush, the thrill of hope. But don't squander it. Don't just assume things are going to turn out the way you want them to. We all have a power, even us lowly little people. It's called the vote. Think of the polling of people that the vast majority, the 70% majority that believed in pro-choice. Donald Trump is running around there being proud of causing the dominoes to fall for the end of Roe. And 70+% of people dislike that. And if all those people, who was a majority, decided on November 5th to wake up, to get dressed, to go and vote with that on their mind, or with the notion of, the Supreme Court making it crystal clear in their clarification that Donald Trump as president could be completely immune of prosecution of any official acts. And we cannot possibly even define what official acts are, because if it's claimed to be an official act, we can't hear about it, we can't know about it, we can't ask questions about it. If the pro-choice issue doesn't motivate you to get up off your couch, does the old deteriorating man with persecution issues, with vengeance issues, given a blank check by the Supreme Court to be a king, something that we took a revolution to free us of? If the vast majority dislikes that and gets out and vote, I like the words of Steve Shives. When we show up, we win. They win when we don't show up. Ladies and gentlemen, let's show up.